episode of Roll Off a Tangent, which I trust will increase your sales resistance should anyone try to interest you in a Feckle Freezer. After the golden age of the 30s and 40s, the 1950s saw a new and different flowering of SF, including more socio-political themes, in which the old sense of wonder has acquired a different flavour than before. The change is hard to pin down without shaky generalizations, but certainly the tale we're about to discuss here is an excellent example of what 50s SF can offer the reader. Frederick Pohl's The Tunnel Under the World appeared in the 1955 January issue of Galaxy. The protagonist, Burckhardt, is a normal guy with a wife, a home, a job in his hometown of Tylerton, and he's having what he thinks is a normal day, June the 15th. Only one slightly odd thing about it, the advertisements that impinge on his hearing have changed. The products are unfamiliar. That's nothing to the shock which we feel is coming to him as he lives through the next day, which is also June the 15th, the same day replayed with more variations in the advertising. Now we know that something monstrous has happened to Burckhardt's reality, but he doesn't yet know since, evidently, his memory has been wiped. Then comes an accident. At midnight, he's not in bed. He's down in the basement on some repair job, and whatever carries out the memory wiping doesn't work down there. So now he does realise that all of Tylerton is being fooled into repeating one June the 15th after another. Those readers familiar with other works by Frederick Pohl won't be surprised to learn that the town is in the thrall of some power in the advertising industry, advertising being a favourite target of this author. But as far as I know, even Pohl has never portrayed any other scheme by ad men as breathtakingly nefarious as this one. Shock piled on shock, using themes of personality recording, miniaturization, and android reconstruction, until it's finally clear that Burckhardt doesn't have a chance to alert the police or the FBI or the army or the judiciary. He'll never get out of Tylerton because, read the story. So, we seem to do it alphabetically, so I'll pass the commenting over to Nikki Zuff, first of all.
Thank you very much. I mean, if you're doing it alphabetically from the first name, then I am first, but otherwise it would be XJ.
That's true.
So, oh boy. I'm going to try and collect myself to not just go into overload here and just try and be concise as we're opening discussion regarding this story. It has a lot of elements that make it creepy without anything creepy being written. It has a very interesting and precise way of inserting dread into you because you know you're reading a story. And therefore, although if you were meeting these situations, they would just be more or less questionable, strange things that are happening in your day-to-day that don't normally happen. But because you're reading a story and it's being told to you in that manner, immediately the sinister undertones are apparent, and all you're left with is the author taking you by the proverbial leash and heading down the path of horror. And this story by Frederick Pohl is probably one of those rare instances where even though you know exactly the method that is being used in front of you, the magician is literally not hiding anything. He has removed his sleeves. He's staring directly at you in the face. And he does the magic trick that you've seen 100 times. you're still impressed by the finesse, by the way it is constructed from a verbal point of view, contextual point of view. And then the story goes a little bit further, and it surprises you with more twists than you could possibly handle. And at the end of it, you can't really know for sure whether or not what you read can really be trusted. And you're just left there sitting in your chair as you're sipping on your brandy or your tea, whichever is your preference. Tonight, mine is tea. And you are somewhat fearful of tomorrow because you might be facing the same reality without ever knowing it. I think this is one of those moments where I've discovered a short story that I did not consume before because of this podcast. And I would have probably never consumed it if the podcast didn't exist. So once again, at least for me, this podcast existing is an entirely a net benefit to my well-being. So for that, I'd like to thank Robert Gibson for providing us the story. And now that we are all gathered here today, we're going to discuss it. But yeah, I have phenomenal impressions, as you have heard, and I cannot wait to dive deeper into the tunnel under the world. Actually, what about you? How did you feel about this story?
This I do believe this is the very first Frederick Pohl story I've ever read, and my impression might change after reading several Frederick Pohl stories. But as of now, I'm quite charmed by the just the sheer wackiness of all the ideas being thrown into this mix. There were like several thoughts were running through my mind while I was reading the story. First one, I was thinking, oh, I'm reading Groundhog Day, and then the second one, I was reading, I'm like reading a short story version of an episode on Twin Peaks or Tales from the Crypt or something. And then and the more I read, the more I'm thinking, this is so Fallout. This is like one of those vote experiments. And I'm specifically reminded of the Gary vote in Fallout 3, or the election vote again in Fallout 3. And I think one of the things that really kept me on the toes for this story is just how many twists and turns it has over the course of a few short pages. And I'm quite impressed, really, by the ability of Frederick Pohl to keep turning the dial on the surprises. Really, and the way it's written, it doesn't feel like an overload. Even there was a section towards the end where Burckhardt and his friend Swanson, well, not really a friend, but more like
Accomplice
of necessity. They were in the factory, or was it before the factory? And then they were going on this long-winded explanation of what things could possibly be. And I was thinking, like, I'm reading an exposition dump, but it turned out not to be the case. It's more like a misleading. It turns out to be more of a method to mislead the reader, I think. And I think the way the whole thing is put together is really, really masterful. And I don't know if I felt any sort of dread. I think I was too busy trying to match the story to a type in my mind. So that is maybe not quite the right way to read this story, but it is not boring, I have to say. It's very good. Very, very good. Yeah, that's what I have to say. Back to you, Robert.
I think this is a rare kind of story where I might think that one could actually make it longer. One could spin it out into perhaps even into a novel. I'm not sure, but it reminds me of Philip K. Dick's novel Time Out of Joint, which is also about a chap who isn't where he thinks he is. Though in the case of Time Out of Joint, the people are real people. They're not reconstructions at all. But even so, their entire town is a fake, and the time they're living in is a fake, and it's spun out into one of Dick's best novels. Anyway, that's just by the way. I say this because when I read this story just before the podcast, it was about the umpteenth time I've read it. I don't know how many times I've read it, but it seems shorter to me this time. And I suppose it's because I know it so well that I kind of, my mind gallops through it and I know, oh yes, this is the bit, this is that bit, and so on. So then I started to think, oh well, it's a bit too brief. And I thought, oh, I bet that Ziv guy or XJ will start grumbling that it's not long enough and it should be filled in more and all that. But obviously, I misjudged you both. So I'm sorry about that.
Well, no, but I do. That's very interesting because I did think that the length is pretty on point, or at least it wrapped up in a way that felt really like it hit the right spot. That wasn't overly draggy. It wasn't too short, too abrupt, rather. I suppose length is, rather than length, I just thought it ended at a really appropriate beat.
I will say that there are two instances in which I will complain about the length. One of them is a compliment, which is when I say, yeah, I read this and I wish it was longer because I just wanted to spend more time with the story. And the second time that I would ever, well, maybe not would ever, but in most instances that I would implicate length is probably tied to pacing. So some things in a lot of stories are too drawn out, and some things are indeed too short. This happens, right? And it's actually a large plight of the current contemporary works, especially media such as TV shows. Because right now, the format is, the package is, we sell to them 8, 10, or 12 episodes. That's what the public gets. That's what most series are like, right? But some shows, let's say, they would benefit from a longer run, or indeed, actually, they would have too much filler and they maybe should have even less than, let's say, 10 or 8. And it all comes down to the type of a story you're trying to tell, right? To me, a lot of contemporary writers, at the very least, have really cool ideas, but they don't give enough context before the moment happens. And they even sometimes try to fill in moments afterwards, right? So let's say the big crescendo of the main character of a story is that they must reconcile their issues with their parent. And it could be alluded to multiple times through dialogue that they have these issues. But if you don't really see it, if you don't really feel it, that there are these problems and they're trying to solve them, the actual moment where the two of them would come together and reconcile will feel hollow, because it will be like a war that was never fought. Now, obviously, you could say, if you really like the author, that, oh, a lot of these things were happening in the background. You just didn't get to see it as a viewer and stuff. Sure, that's I don't have a problem with that, but it still makes the moment cheap. It doesn't give you any levity, because a problem has just been solved in front of you that you never really felt. And to me, that's what, those are the cardinal sins of a story being too short or too long. Those type of situations. The story is just right.
Yeah, it's longer than you think, actually. It's 32 pages. It didn't feel like 32 pages when I read it.
Didn't feel like it was long. And I mean, that's really good control of pacing, and the way things are being fed into the story is very well done. It's like there is never a dull moment. And just when you thought you have figured out this story, it gives you a different spin altogether. Like the ending is so so completely unexpected.
For sure. Exactly.
That very last twist.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll talk about it. So those of you who have come in here and haven't read the story, this is your final warning. From here on out, we're just going to be talking about the story and all that pertains in it, because I think this would be a very dull episode if we didn't at least get into some of the spoilers, because that's what makes the story so rich and so invigorating. It's like as if you gave me what are they called? Those noodles that Japanese people eat. Ramen. It's like if you gave me ramen but said that I could only eat the noodles. Come on. What are you talking about? So, first of all, the very first opening of the story sets you up into a world that you think you understand but you don't, right? And I think every consecutive twist trying to explain what's happening and it turning out to be false is always fed in a feedback loop, sort of to the beginning. Because how does the story start? The guy wakes up from a dream where he explodes. And as it turns out, that's the only truth in the entire story. It's the only real memory of this guy, that he died. Everything else is bullshit, for the lack of a better term. And I love that about the story. I think that's such a masterstroke.
And I also tag on to that with just how every single twist is so out of the blue. It's the story would drive you towards one direction, or at least the narrative would drive you towards one conclusion that you as a reader might come to. But then it takes a twist into a direction that you completely did not expect, and that makes sense. That is the masterful part, because it's so easy to make a twist that doesn't follow from the rest of the story, and it will be a twist, but it's not a good twist. Whereas in this particular story, everything is first you have the and I'm gonna have to say, like, there is I like one of the ways I think it manages to successfully do it is that it doesn't take it builds on the previous twist, because the advertising part of the conspiracy theory, shall we say, is never really lost. It was just given a new spin every time. Because first the story leads you into a direction of being abducted for this experimental town, and then it takes a twist where everyone is more like a robot, and then it takes another twist into where everyone is the people trapped in those robot bodies are legal in a sense, because they have all lost their rights because they're all dead already. And then it takes another twist, which I find the whole thing to be really really excellent in the way the Frederick Pohl led the reader by the nose.
Yeah, I think the one trap which one would be best not to get into when talking about this story is getting into the issue of how far it would be technically possible to do all this. Because really, the better and more interesting question is it morally possible that something like this might happen? And I think the answer has to be, unfortunately, yes, in that I can imagine some people salving their consciences by saying, well, we've we haven't killed anybody, it's just that the town blew up anyway, and so there are all these leftover bodies and brains and all that. We're doing them a favor, we're giving them an extra day of life by doing this experiment. Yes, I'm afraid I think it might be possible to rationalize, people might rationalize it that way.
That's true. And I have to say, well, setting aside the possibility or lack thereof of the technology involved, is I'll agree with Robert. It's not what people should be focusing on when they read this. Clearly, this is born out of those. The science fiction is very, very 1950s. It is very Fallout. It is brain in vacuum jars and computers with vacuum tubes. That kind of science.
It's much more creepy than that.
It totally is.
It's I think it's I'll jump on the same train that Robert is currently on. The whole idea of this being realistic never escaped my mind, and it began with all these different advertising stuff coming in there, and it never really left. Even when they started talking about the ridiculous answers as to why this could be happening, it's either the Russians, or it's the aliens. Then to me, I was just like, I don't think that's exactly the answer, but it could be so close to the truth where that's what the bad people want you to think that is, right? Like, I thought that the twist is going to be that they are going to be told, yeah, it is the Russians, or yeah, it is the aliens. Well done, you go back to your life now, right? And then the experiments are going to be continuing on them because it's actually their government doing it on them. And they want them to believe that it was these horrible people doing it to you, instead of it actually being your own, individuals, your own people. The tone of the story, like, not for a single moment did I think that Tunnel Under the World is going to be quote unquote silly. And I think that's something really great, because a lot of the times you read something and the author is trying to mislead you, and he does give you like a silly answer, and you kind of believe in that silly answer instead of being like, I don't think so, right? And this story manages to have a character say something ridiculous, and it actually sounded ridiculous to the reader, in a sense, not like, oh, that's silly, I don't want to read this anymore, to, you're wrong, something else is happening here. Yeah, that was really a really great thing. So regarding you harbored on regarding the last twist. What was it that was so striking for you? Reveal to us, what is the final twist?
Well, they're all in a game of tabletop D&D.
More or less.
But there's another twist beyond that, isn't there? The really final twist is that the product advertising is merely a preliminary, and it's going to be testing political slogans on.
There
on
is that
people.
too. There is that too.
That's what I thought you were talking about regarding the final twist. Actually.
No. Well, I
No,
wouldn't
okay.
say that is the final twist, because that was revealed by, what's his name, Dorchin, just before Burckhardt went past the 4-4, so to speak, and see that, no, I'm actually on a tabletop, like literally.
I see what you mean. Yeah. I mean, that's just a horrifying. It depends what you classify as twist is, but yeah, it is definitely like
I mean,
a horrifying
because
realization.
Because at that moment, right, when I read that they were actually on the tabletop, I was like, because by then I was thinking of things like the Truman Show, the Dark City. I was thinking of Matrix. No one had ever in my memory of all the media I've ever consumed, no one had ever came up with a tabletop. I was like, this is fresh, this is good, this is original.
It's to save money, you see.
Yeah, and the answer actually makes sense. It's in a really twisted sort of way. That's how brilliant it is. And I was like, when I read that part, I was like, of course you would do that. It totally makes
Remember,
sense.
in the story, the let's put it this way: the big bad manager, he says, like, if I have to build something to full scale, I'll get it done. But if it is not required, then I'll save the money. So some of these are just decorations. But it even goes even beyond that. Not only is it decorations, but it's the size of a pinhead. And you're like, you. That's crazy.
It is really good, man. I was like, oh, yep, that is how a money guy would think. And if you could even do away with the tabletop, why wouldn't you? Right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, why does he need it in, full size? It makes complete sense, just like you said, actually. But let me, the final, not the final, let's say, but like the most horrifying twist in the ending for me was what Robert mentioned, which is like, this is just the beginning. Like, this is malevolent enough. It doesn't need to be even more malevolent. Please stop, Frederick Pohl. No, think of the children. Like, holy moly. Of course it's going to be used for that, because it's always like something is invented and then somebody finds like, yeah, but we can do like way worse. Let me show you. and you're just like, okay. And the idea that soon enough they're gonna be walking around this town and it's gonna be like, vote for me because X, Y, and Z, and then there's gonna be like a testing poll, like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
I'm
okay, they didn't really like that.
So I'm quite curious.
Very sinister.
I'm quite curious. So that portion, the propaganda part is what.
Are you talking actually? Because we can't. Oh no, wait, that's just me. Go on ahead.
So you guys, the advertising part is the one that really creeped you out the most. The propaganda part, the turning into into a government campaign kind of thing. Is that the part that really made you guys feel dread when reading this conclusion of Frederick Pohl?
Well, it's just a nice progression from all the other ideas. I mean, when you get that far, you're really you're in such big trouble anyway that you can't really say anything's worse than anything else. But it certainly is a nice logical progression of the story. It's a good note to end the story on. Mind you, I'd quite like to live in Tylerton. Actually, it seems like quite a nice, normal place. You know?
Since I can't deal with loud noises, count me out.
Yeah, well, that's the only drawback. This advertising. Yes, I agree. Feckle freezers and all that. That's true. Yeah.
Interesting.
Have to wear earplugs.
So it's in a sense it's more like you thought Frederick Pohl had already led you to the worst, and then he puts out something else that's even more terrible than what you thought. Is that it? Fair enough.
Yep. And
for me, that moment was the tabletop. To be quite honest, yeah.
When I first read the story, I was really quite young. I was just a child, really, and I didn't really understand that end. I thought, tabletop? What's this, tabletop? And I had to ask an adult who had read the story, what does it mean? And it was a friend of my mum's who'd read the story, and she said, oh, it means that they're only about that high. And then I got the message. But the story itself was just a bit too much for my sensible self, my straight-laced, sensible self to swallow at that young age. You know, I expected things to be more normal, but I soon grew out of that.
For me, the most terrifying part of this entire story has to be the compliance of the several individuals who are helping the big bad manager. Especially the woman who's like, yeah, I've got given a new body and I kind of have to work here and stuff, but I'm ugly and I'm 60 and this is what truly terrified me when she said, and I don't really come back to my body. Rarely at all. Almost never now. And and again, I think it's all because of how real this feels. I could just imagine her. What if the body doesn't exist anymore? What if she wanted to come back to it and they could have just altered some of the brain waves in her head? She doesn't need to come back. What if she never was an old woman? There's so much possibilities, and because the story takes itself so seriously and is so thoughtfully made, it's not just mere speculation. It is something that you could see being further explored in this godforsaken, I don't even know any other way to really say or call this world, but yeah, godforsaken place that is the world of tunnel under the world. There's a lot of world in my speech, but I think you get the message.
Yep.
I mean, let me read what our dear friend Anthony had to say. Anthony Simeon couldn't make it today, but he has given his thoughts. Here he said, I found myself saying at the end, thank God companies in the real world have settled on using focus groups and the fact that brain transfer to robots isn't possible yet. What a creepy dystopian story. This seems like a proto-cyberpunk tale to me. Corporations with enough power to snatch dead people and use them endlessly to test advertising efficiency or efficacy. Talk about late-stage capitalism. The title of the story seems a bit overblown, but it also seems appropriate. What the tunnel contains is a cool mystery and reveal, but it's not under the entire world, is it? Just the town that blew up? ? Anyway, that small quibble aside, I give it, and I won't tell you what he's given until the end of the podcast, but I would like to comment on a single thing, and that is something that Egre has mentioned. That tabletop is their entire world. So the tunnel under the world is the tunnel under the tabletop. That's all they have. They're on a damn tabletop. That's it. There's nothing else. There's some coffee on the other side of the room in a cupboard. That's what's terrifying about it. Tunnel under the world, and the world is a 2x4. You know? Get me out of here. You know.
It's I mean, like the vibe of that of all those votes in Fallout 3, or just the Fallout franchise, is so strong, man. I wouldn't be surprised if the writers that worked on Fallout read plenty of Frederick Pohl, or at least one of them had read this one. Like the vote experiment that really stuck in my mind throughout this whole time, since the years that have gone by when I played Fallout 3, is really the election campaign vote experiment. Because like when the player enter the vote, you find like everyone's dead and everyone had pretty much killed themselves off, and then through like little drip feeds of information you find that there was some election going on, and nobody wanted to be the president, and you wonder why. Everyone was trying to nominate someone else to be the president, and you wonder why until you get to the very end of the vote, and then you realize why they didn't want to be the president. And the cool thing about that vote is how the beginning tells the end of the story, and how the end of the story loops back to the beginning. And in this sense, it's very similar to the tunnel under the world, because you start off with the dream, like Nikki had highlighted, that Burckhardt had died, and that was the only truth. And then when you go back to the end of the story, it leads right back to the beginning.
Yeah. Exactly. You could actually read the story in a loop.
Yeah.
Pretty well.
I mean, it is a loop. It is a never-ending loop for poor Burckhardt.
One thing that Anthony mentioned that I think bears talking about is the allocation of the story into a genre. And I think he's making a pretty good claim regarding it being very close to cyberpunk. Cyberpunk as a genre is about more powerful entities in the world interfering in the day-to-day normal lives of the citizens, and doing their nefarious means, nefarious ways for whatever means necessary. Being able to completely and utterly ruin someone's life in a single decision, just because they want a number to go up by 0.01%. And it's kind of similar here, where you have these individuals, these brains that are trapped inside, and nobody asked them, because you're all dead. You're dead. You're property. End of story. That is very cyberpunk, and it's so creepy. Oh, it's
like, to me, one of the better parts of the story is that the manager actually isn't a horrible guy.
He's just a guy doing his job, and doing his job pretty well.
Yeah. He's not a horrible guy. He's not a big bad villain, and that is the most that is the most the best way to write a villain, actually, I think.
For sure. I mean, there's always a place for a big dramatic psycho in any story.
Man, of course.
But yeah, of course. But I think Hollywood has gone, or let's even just say contemporary writing has gone into, like, we need to justify why the villain is bad. Right? So we have to give him a really sad backstory, or he has to go through some turmoil. His father beat him every day, but then finally there was a moment where he picked up the fork and stabbed him in the eye, and that's when he knew the true power came from violence. Whatever, right? Sometimes the villain just has to be a really efficient individual who does his job really well, and the consequences, the confined space do not exist because he does everything kind of within the letter of the law. And that's the obstacle.
I mean, like within a certain parameter, this dodging guy is actually compassionate. You think about it. He's actually willing to talk to Burckhardt. And I think if Burckhardt had led like a committee of workers association to negotiate for better treatment, Dodgin might have agreed. That is the horrifying part about this whole relationship, I feel.
For sure. All right.
Yeah, if they were making a film of this, I suppose Dorchin would be given a posh British accent. Show how
Absolutely.
My good sir.
Posh British accent always makes for a great villain. All villains must have posh British accents.
All of them. I don't know.
All of them.
Well, even Martians, because I've just watched yesterday. I watched the Disney movie John Carter, and the Thurn sounds fairly British.
Yeah. I don't know. I think the rule of it is that if you've got a mad scientist, they have to have a German accent. If you've got a sophisticated villain, it's it's obviously the British accent. And then if you need a madman who will stop at nothing, you give him really broken English lines, and he should either talk in Arabic or Russian accent, right? So it would be like, you understand not? I'm not here for pleasure. Here business. My business. You're deaf. Something like that. Anyway,
Brilliant.
Reasonable.
Thank you. I will accept all applications, Hollywood. If you need a bad guy, I'm pretty good at it. Just ask my players. So I don't have much to say about the story more than I have just said. Besides, you just need to go read it. Really, it's a tale that comes by not in a year's time or if in a 5 years time, but I think like once a decade there's this really good story that just ticks all the boxes, and you really can't complain. That's it's like a decade story for me, let's say.
Good. Right.
Well, do you have anything else you want to tell us about the story, Robert?
Only that I can't name all that many Frederick Pohl stories as such, apart from this one, that impressed me a lot. But he's very good at collaborations with other novelists. He wrote novels together with Cyril Kornbluth that are extremely good, classics, and he wrote one with Jack Williamson also that's very good. He wrote more, but I've only read one of them. So he's better as a collaborator than as a lone writer. But this story is an exception, I think.
All right. Actually, what about you? You've got any final thoughts before we go to the scores?
Well, just when was it written again, Robert?
1950 something, right?
1950.
1955.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think I can safely say that Frederick Pohl probably was responsible for a lot of had probably inspired a lot of things that came after him. Just the ideas that he had planted. But yeah, otherwise I echo the sentiments of the rest of the panel here. Go read the story. It's worth your time.
I give the story a 10 out of 10. I'll
Same
say
here.
nothing else. Actually, what do you give it?
It's a masterpiece. Can't be anything lower than 9.
And then there's Anthony's score, which is 8 out of 10.
All right. As for you, Robert, what's your score?
Yeah, I'll
12
give it a
out of 10?
No, just 10. I'll be mathematical here.
Thank goodness.
Orthodox mathematical.
Finally, in one way or another, you have been converted. Thank you for purchasing what's the name of that refrigerator again?
Feckle Freezer.
The Feckle Freezer.
Yes, our sponsors.
Have you bought the Feckle Freezer?
Our sponsors would like to remind our audience that should you enjoy this podcast, please like and subscribe.
We'll sell whatever you'd like.
Yeah, the voice screamed inarticulately with rage. I'm warning you, get out and buy a Feckle Freezer right away. Hurry up, hurry for Feckle, hurry for Freckle, hurry, 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 Feckle, 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 Feckle. So that's the sort of thing you have to put up with if you live in Tylerton.
Big no for me. Can't stand loud noises.
Yeah.
All right, I suppose that wraps up the podcast. And like and subscribe. Everything else stinks. All right. We wish you a good one. Take care.
Right.